Oh yeah, bring on the news.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It is Saturday, which means it is time for the content report, showcasing what you may expect to see from the latest uploaded production videos to the Console Bay platform. Let's get right into it. For the Artag Rise project, we started working on the assets, the tiles, the sprites, and all the other content that is going to be used to create our levels. The very first level I'm working on is referred to as the trial course, which is supposed to be the demo presentation of the game. And the levels for this particular chapter vary between taking place outside and inside, with some of the levels being underground cave exploration levels, others taking place in the exterior on the mountainside, like the introduction to the story of the trial course, and the vast majority of the levels take place inside of the old version of the facility, with retro equipment and obstacles. I gotta tell you, these tile designs already look eons better than the stuff I had in the initial version that I was working on in GameMaker Studio. Not only that, the Godot's scene system is a godsend to creating obstacles, especially ones that are made up of multiple components or multiple objects. And don't even get me started on the export variable mechanic. I absolutely love this thing. I have pretty much pre-programmed all of the obstacles to require no further programming and still be able to be controlled and customized on a per level basis. Pretty much at this point, any obstacle that I have, like the lasers or the saw cannons, can either be set up to operate independently or be controlled by pretty much any sort of input device in the game. A few episodes have been spent on the creation of the player animations, and because one of the features in the game is the allowance for the player to choose the color of their jumpsuit, I have animated the body and the head separately. Technically, the head is just a single still image. And the jumpsuit was animated in all white because then I can use the engine's self-modulate property to set the color of the jumpsuit via code. The first character I've created is actually a character of myself. I myself actually play one of the characters or one of the protagonists in the game. Remember, this game is called Artag Rise or Retroactive Gamers Rise. This is a game that is based on our Let's Play channel brand, the Retroactive Gamers. So Tim and I are going to be playing as two of the several protagonists that this game's story follows. So when animating the character movement, it kind of made sense to animate the jumpsuit separately, because then I can just swap out the head sprites for whatever character the players choose to play as. There's only a couple of features remaining left to implement, specifically for the head of the character, making sure that the head also bobs up and down, left and right, depending on the motion of the sprite for the jumpsuit, and I think that will be it for the player movement. Way back when I just started working on this game in GameMaker Studio Engine, one of the greatest lessons that I have learned is that if you want to really tie in your player with the environment, is you have to add some particles that signify the interaction of the player object and the world environment. In this case, these are dust particles that are being kicked off by the feet, and when you're jumping off the walls, all these little tiny details that really tie the player in the realm of the environment that the character is traversing. Also, in the same episode, I have created the system that emulates the movement of the second character. This is supposed to be a solution to a very big glaring problem in this game. You see, the story of this game follows a character pair. It's not just one single character. And while, yes, this game is a co-op game, meaning that you can play the same game with 4 players and 4 controllers, and if you choose to play in single player, there still have to be at least 2 characters for the story to, well, be cohesive. Realistically, it's the relationship between these characters that is being explored in the game, which eventually ties into the main story. So at this point in time, I had a few choices. Either I make this a single character story game, I make it a character pair story game, but then I have to create some sort of an artificial intelligence that can navigate the environment, evade the obstacles, time their jumps, depending on the complex puzzles of each and every single level. Or I go with the option which you see before you. This option simply makes the second player record the movements of the first player and then mimic it a few seconds later. Now yes, this is by no means a perfect system, and there's quite a lot of finicky situations you're going to encounter when you play the game. For example, on many occasions when the main player, the actual player, the human, evades certain obstacles and hazards, the second player, who is perfectly mimicking the movement of the first player, is going to end up overlapping with those same hazards and obstacles right behind him. And it's gonna look a little bit kind of weird, but to be honest, I simply have way too much other stuff that I have to develop for this game to facilitate the time and resources to developing an AI for a secondary character. The true AI, the one that times their jumps and carefully regulates their movement speed to evade obstacles and hazards to make it look more human-like. To be honest, it's gonna take way too long. Think of it this way. You can go on YouTube and you can type in stuff like teaching AI how to walk or teaching AI how to evade obstacles in various retro games. And you will find that it takes thousands and thousands and thousands of iterations and a very complex understanding of artificial intelligence to really make a player that can do that. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure if I will create a player like that, I'm gonna win a Nobel Prize. And I somehow don't see that happening. So with that said, option C it is. The second player will record the movement of the first player and simply mimic that movement as if it's a record player. Now, I could make it a canonical thing. I could say that the second player's respawn machine is broken, quote unquote, so instead of just killing and respawning the player, it actually heals the player in real time, which means that we would have to record some screaming sound effects when the second player hits a spike or gets sawn in half. He just screams and then maybe some particles flow out, but then he continues the path as if nothing ever happened. And I can make some dialogues that explain that it's agony for him and it's a mental strain, so it's actually canonical as opposed to just being like, well, yeah, I mean, that saw blade that just completely obliterated me, yeah, he just kind of walks right through that. Oh boy, look at the time. What's the next question? Yes, it looks a little bit jarring, but these are the compromises I have to work with. The fact that the motions that are being recorded are those of a human, the character does kind of look like he's human. And this solves a very major problem for me, and all I have to do now is just program the dialogues and responses, maybe a few grunts here and there when the character hits some lethal hazards, and I think there will be a satisfactory solution. So, this is it for the Retroactive Gamers game. Let's move on to the next project. For the Dream Team Theater project, a lot of the time has been spent on recreating the materials in Godot engine. Considering that we have a total of 12 front barrels, 6 back pieces, 1 grip handle, and presently only 1 texture set, which is the yellow tech pistol texture set, I have to basically create 18 materials and apply to each one the diffuse map, the normal map, the ambient occlusion map, the metalness map, and the roughness maps for each material, one at a time. Now that I'm talking about this, I'm really starting to think that maybe I should make the material creation automated. See if that is even possible. Something like generating a resource of the material and then assigning all the textures, maybe setting some properties, because there are a lot of textures and a lot of materials that I really have to apply. Remember, 12 front barrels, 6 back pieces, 1 grip times 7 separate texture sets equates to 504 separate pistol combinations.
Which also means I need to create 133 materials for all these individual bits.
Yeah, that's a lot of materials to create, so I'm thinking that I should really invest into some sort of an automated tool for something like this. Now, these textures are made in Substance Painter, and to be honest, if I could export a material where all the textures are already in the materials themselves, and these materials are detected by Godot Engine, I could technically work with it as it is, because the materials are already created and the textures are already populated. But currently, in order for me to do that, I have to load the textures back into Blender and then export the OBJ file, now including the materials. So that's a lot of work that still has to be done in any case. So yeah, That's quite a bit of work. If anybody knows of an automated tool that can generate Godot engine material resource type file that you can just maybe specify the name of the texture to use and apply it automatically into the appropriate slots, that would be great. The last few episodes, we did manage to program the whole system to actually be confined within our crate. So when you spent your hard-earned currency to get that box of randomly generated goodies, you will now get anywhere between 3 and 7 randomly generated pistols, all of which currently use the yellow tech pistol theme. But as I'm gonna continue creating these texture sets, we'll be able to see much more variety in terms of the color palettes. Now, you most likely have noticed a significant amount of lag as soon as the crate started generating the weapons. This is happening because as the weapons are generated, those weapons are pre-programmed in Godot to use certain materials, which means that those materials have to be loaded. So say the crate generates a total of 7 randomly generated weapons. Each weapon has 3 parts to it, which means that 7 times 3 is 21. 21 materials have to be loaded in real time as the game is running. That is horrendous. So the solution to this problem, which I have yet to experiment with, is to make sure that you preload all of the materials prior to the start of the game. That's why loading screens exist. Loading screens is when you load all the resources. So that's going to be on my to-do list for this particular mechanic. Basically, make sure that all the heavy resources like textures, materials, and high poly models are loaded at the time of the start of the project and not during runtime. Aside from the random weapon spawning mechanic, we did also create all the animations for the pistol that the player is holding in his hand. We had set up all the state machines, all the conditions, and switching for the animations, so the pistol is technically already in the game. It just doesn't shoot. So I'm gonna go ahead and check it up to my to-do list. This is all the content I have for you for the Dream Team Theater project. Let's go ahead and move on to the next bit of content. You know, in the state of every single game, there's this magical point when the game stops being just a conglomeration of various different objects that just kind of do whatever the heck you program them to do, and it starts to actually feel like the game. And I think I have started reaching that point with this project, and the only thing that changed is the fact that now we have stakes. During this week, we have programmed the player's mortality, basically being able to get killed, being able to get knocked down, being able to receive damage from the enemies that get too close, as well as fall damage. I found myself being more constrained, watching my steps, making sure that I don't fall off the ledges, watching behind my shoulders, make sure that there's no enemies nearby. This is now feeling like an actual game, and the next steps would now be the creation of levels, placement of the enemies, enemy AI, and continuing to expand on the functionality of the inventory and start working on things like crafting and brewing for our potions and coats. Since we've taken the time to program the mortality, we've also programmed our death screen, which is essentially going to be the slowly fading and pulsating effect that gives the other player a little bit of time to waltz over and revive them, provided they have the necessary potions to do so. But should the player not make it in time, we have a nice little transition, and it will tell the player that they have to respawn at the nearest bonfire. I'm still not sure how exactly I'm going to handle the recreation of the enemies if only one of the two players dies. If both players die, then sure, all the enemies have to be respawned. If only one player dies, what do I do? Half the enemies? No enemies at all, and just let them retrace their steps back to the second player while he's, sitting there safely in some corner trying to survive? I'm honestly not really sure at this point. Maybe we'll just have all the enemies respawn, so if one player dies, the second player has to basically pay the price, and this maybe would encourage the cooperation, more watching over the other player, watching to make sure that the second player doesn't get killed and the first player has to pay for it. We've done quite a bit of work on the inventory system. We are now capable of switching our weapons based on whichever weapons you have in your store. As you can see, we're playing a little bit of a pickup animation, which is I thought was kind of nice. And the coolest thing is that I have made the system where each weapon is a separate scene, and it is extremely easy to add new weapons now. All the weapons have a set amount of animations, and if every single weapon that I create has the same animation with the same name, it's just a matter of swapping the scene, and all the rest of the code and signals are still connected, ready to be used with all the code running just fine. Doesn't matter which weapon it is. So that system actually opened my eyes to the procedure that I would be taking on to creating weapons for this game. Now, when I started working on this inventory system, I tried to employ a very universal method of displaying items so that if we have different categories or different types of items, I don't have to code multiple systems that would display all those items. It's technically just one single dictionary that contains 3 categories: weapons, armor, and potions, and each one of those contains a whole bunch of items of their own. And aside from the inventory presentation and the ability to list, select, and use items, I've started working on the actual usability and the actual code for the items themselves. For example, the healing potions, the healing flask and the healing vial. Those are actually the 2 different sizes that a consumable potion comes in the game. Now, for now, at least at this point in time, there's only 2 types of potions. There's a coat and there's a consumable. So the consumables are the vials and flasks that you can consume as a player. They give you basic buffs, like the strength buffs, the speed buffs, and the health buffs. At least for now, those are the options. The other type of potion is a coat, and this is an idea that I got from the Witcher series, where you can apply certain types of poisons or certain types of substances onto your sword. These are basically buffs for your weapons, and the way I'm thinking of handling it is by defining how many slots a single type of weapon contains. So this means I'd have to create a whole bunch of different weapons, maybe create a couple of axes, maybe like an old rusty axe, a medium quality axe, and a really good axe, and that's just the axes. We can have halberds and other types of weapons, and each one of those will contain a certain amount of slots, which will allow you to apply really any type of a coat onto the weapon. So if you have some really fancy schmancy sword, it will allow you to apply maybe 4 or 5 coats of different types of buffs, and you can mix and match them, or you can use the same one over and over and over again, which realistically will only expand the time that that buff stays on your sword rather than the accumulated amount of say damage that it does. Graphically speaking, the way I'm thinking of handling the user interface component of this buffing, the weapon buffing mechanic, is by having a bar in the top left corner right beside your health and stamina that is essentially going to show as many slots as there are buff slots or coat slots available on the particular weapon that you are holding at the moment. And whenever you apply a specific coat, it is going to make that dot slide to the right, depicting the amount of time you have left for that particular buff, and it's going to display a little image, a little icon of the specific buff that you applied to the weapon. So as the time goes on, the dots will slowly start to go back to the original place, indicating how much time you have left, and if you want to top it up, you basically just reapply the same buff again. Now, I'm thinking that's going to be a bit of a problem with, well, what happens when you apply 2 buffs at the same time? Do they both just kind of run out in 30 seconds or 20 seconds or however long they may be configured to be? And I'm thinking that I'm probably gonna have to put in some sort of a system that will detect if there's already a buff present in the place and double the amount of time that buff has before going back to 0. So I figure, as I mentioned before, if you apply 2 of the same buffs, the total accumulated amount of damage is not going to be compounded. It's actually going to be the time that is going to be compounded. But here's the thing. On the other hand, we could have the buff be compounded, the amount of damage be compounded, but the time it takes for that buff to run out is still going to be the same. So there's a bit of a decision I have to make here. Say you have a weapon with 3 slots, you apply 3 of the same buffs to that weapon. What accumulates? The time or the amount of damage that particular buff gives that weapon? Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. This is the content that is available now on the platform for all the progress we made on the project, so if you're interested, head on over to theconceptbay.net and let's go ahead and move on to the final project. still going at it, still working hard on the quest creation tool. And the individual toolbar component that you see in front of you now is the item template definition tool. You see, this is supposed to be an RPG game, or at least as close to RPG as I can get it myself with my own two hands. Now, this is also a crafting game. So combine those two terms together and you're gonna get a game that has a lot of items that go into it. And that's kind of what I want to do here. I want this game to be abundant with various world items. And these items have to tie into the quest creation tool, because as a reward for completing quests or talking to some characters or maybe providing some sort of information, the player will be able to unlock certain items or receive certain items as a reward for using specific responses. This prompted me with an idea to create this toolbar that essentially gives you all the options that a specific item can be, all the settings, all the properties, all the values, and you can input whatever you want into those text boxes to define the values and properties, and that's it. You save the item, and now you can deploy that item to any quest you want. Realistically, at any point in time in a conversation, regardless if it's an official quest conversation or just a little passing discussion you can have with an NPC, you can receive this templated item. During the development, I have gotten this particular tool to its very end for one single item that is defined in our world. This had put a few things into perspective. The amount of time that I had spent developing this one interface chunk, which is meant for this one particular item type, which is supposed to be the brew or tonic. The time spent on this had really put it into perspective how much time I'm gonna be spending developing this one single tool. Then I had to ask myself the question, what is the purpose of this tool? The purpose of this tool is to make it convenient to grant items to the player at any point in time during the conversation. However, the amount of time that it's going to cost me to develop this easy to access tool is going to be a little bit too much. This tool is going to cost me way too much time, especially since the interface that you see in front of you, that interface is very specific to the brews and tonics item type. And you see, every single item does not share the same structure. Some have effects, some have properties, some have certain settings. There are a few properties that are shared, like the value, the weight, and maybe the name, but other than that, each item has a totally unique set of properties which requires a totally unique type of an interface. And here's the thing, if I knew that this game is only going to have a certain predetermined amount of types of items, I can understand investing my time into this type of tool. But as it stands right now, I don't know how many items we're gonna have. We could have the brews and tonics, weapons and armor, but later on I could add scrolls or books or notes or maybe some other artifacts. I could be adding items, and all of these items, every time I add them, every time I come up with a new item, it's going to have its own template, which means that I have to go back to the quest creation tool and create its own graphical user interface for that one specific new item. So what is the solution to this then? What is my next step? How am I going to move forward with being able to assign items to the player without having to develop this whole graphical user interface system for every new item? Well, the answer is dictionaries. I don't really know why I didn't think of this earlier, but dictionaries are absolutely fantastic for just solving this problem. You see, every single item that is available in the game is already predefined in the game's database, which is in the form of a dictionary. This database initially was created for the graphical user interface version of the item template tool, but now I can simply reuse it to pull up any item in the database and just assign it to the node and simply edit out any stuff that I don't need. I also went ahead and implemented a teeny tiny dictionary checker to make sure that the dictionary I supply here after I delete all the stuff I don't need is still a valid dictionary that can be just deployed into the game right away. To be honest, I am half considering on whether or not I should just use this system for the other types of item granting nodes, mainly for journals and for quest items or the quest flags. For now, we'll strictly stick with the quest items. I think we need to do a thorough test before we judge whether or not this is a suitable solution. Now, this brings us to a very interesting point. We are now at the point where we can define new quests, add quest nodes, which can allow us to supply NPC dialogue, player dialogue options, meaning multiple responses, granting, checking, or removing an inventory item with the possibility of having branching paths depending on whether the player's inventory fails or satisfies the criteria for the item that we're searching. Same exact system for the quest items, where we can add, check, and remove a quest item from the hidden background quest flags dictionary. This is for keeping track of the various criteria throughout the game that don't necessarily require the player's awareness of them. This sort of a system allows us to make it so that certain achievements you get from one quest can satisfy criteria for unlocking or proceeding with another quest. And finally, the quest node allows us to write to the player's journal. This is the place where the player's current quests and tasks for each quest can be written to, marked as failed or marked as completed. All of this is savable and loadable to and from a file that is stored on the user's computer. So, this means we are pretty much done with this tool. At least for what I would consider to be the most rudimentary basic feature set for any RPG quest creation tool.
You know what that means?
That means we can get back to the main game and start working on all those core gameplay mechanics. Finally. I mean, this would be the point when we start testing the feasibility of this particular tool, how flexible it is, what kind of quests and what kind of flexibility in terms of cross-connecting the quests we have. So, yeah, I think it's just about the testing time. So, this is all that I have for this week. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope to see you on the platform. If you're interested in watching the full uncut development videos of how I create all of these tools and features, how I animate, all of that stuff is available for the conceptbay.net members. And always remember, if you're a developer going through some motivational dry spell, little case of burnout blues, I recommend taking a look at the people who have made it in the industry. It's a great motivational boost. Watch some GDC videos, watch some presentations, watch some speakers at conventions talking about the games that you find interesting. Whenever I do so, I end up projecting myself onto the speaker, and it helps immensely with rejuvenating your morale, your motivation, and staving off burnout. You'd be surprised what a powerful driving force just a teeny bit of jealousy will get you. I will see you guys in the next video, and as always, hey developer, remember your vision.